In 2023, the unthinkable happened. The Panama Canal, the artery of global trade, began to fail. A historic drought cut ship traffic. Cargo limits were imposed. Waiting times stretched for weeks. Billions of dollars in trade slowed down because one waterway ran low on water. And that's when a dangerous question surfaced. What if the Panama Canal is no longer reliable? Mexico had an answer. Not a second canal, but a land bridge. A 300-kilometer freight corridor across the Isthmus of Tehuantepec, linking the Pacific to the Gulf of Mexico, using modernized ports, high-capacity rail, and new industrial zones. Some are calling it the Panama Canal killer. To understand why the Interoceanic corridor matters, you first have to understand why the Panama Canal matters and why that matters less than it used to. The Panama Canal opened in 1914. Before it existed, a ship traveling from New York to San Francisco had to sail around the entire bottom of South America, a journey of about 22,500 kilometers, taking weeks. The canal cut that to roughly 9,500 kilometers. It did more than save time. It rewired global trade. Today, the canal handles about 13,000 to 14,000 ships per year. It moves everything. Liquefied natural gas from the US Gulf Coast to Asia, grain from the American Midwest to Europe, consumer electronics from Chinese factories to East Coast ports. Panama collects around $4 to $5 billion in toll revenue annually. It is, in many ways, one of the most valuable pieces of infrastructure on Earth. But here's the structural problem with being that important. When something goes wrong, the consequences are global and immediate. The first crack is water. The Panama Canal's expansion, completed in 2016, created a third lane, allowing it to handle the massive Neo-Panamax ships that modern shipping companies prefer. But those larger locks use a lot more water per transit, and the canal does not have a limitless supply. Gatun Lake serves two masters. It powers the Panama Canal's lock system and supplies drinking water to Panama City. When severe drought hit in 2023 and extended into 2025, canal authorities faced a hard trade-off: protect shipping capacity or protect fresh water for millions of residents. Restrictions remained in place through mid-2025 before partial recovery. The World Bank's 2025 climate risk profile projects drier patterns continuing toward 2030. Daily transits fell from the normal 38 to as few as 24. For a canal that already runs near capacity, that reduction was massive. Ships waited up to 21 days. Those delays alone cost carriers millions in fuel, charter fees, and disrupted schedules. The second crack is capacity. The canal has essentially reached its ceiling. Even with the expanded locks, there are only so many ships it can physically move in a day, and global shipping demand keeps growing. The world's major shipping lines have been ordering ever larger vessels that, in some cases, are already too big for the canal. The ultra-large container ships carrying 24,000 or more TEUs, which stands for 20-foot equivalent units, which is the standard shipping container measurement, can't fit through the Panama Canal at all. They have to go around the Cape of Good Hope at Africa's tip instead. The canal, revolutionary in 1914, is physically constrained in a way that no amount of money can easily fix. The third crack is geopolitical. For most of the last century, the Panama Canal existed in a relatively stable geopolitical context. The United States built it, ran it until 1999, and then handed it over to Panama under agreed terms. It became a kind of neutral global infrastructure. That neutrality is increasingly under pressure. In 2024 and into 2025, US-China tensions continued to intensify. Trade tariffs, export controls on semiconductors, and growing concerns about supply chain vulnerability pushed American companies to rethink their dependence on manufacturing in Asia and their dependence on specific maritime routes. Meanwhile, the question of control over strategic infrastructure became a geopolitical flashpoint. In late 2024 and early 2025, the future governance of ports near the Panama Canal became a subject of public political debate at the highest levels of the United States government, reflecting just how much strategic weight this single waterway now carries. Pull out a map of Mexico and look at the southern end of the country. You'll notice it narrows dramatically before the Yucatan Peninsula begins. That narrow strip of land is the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. It's approximately 300 kilometers across, less than 190 miles, separating the Pacific Ocean from the Gulf of Mexico. People have known about this geography for centuries. The idea of building some kind of transit route across it is not new. Earlier, American and European powers surveyed it as a possible canal route in the 1800s before Panama was ultimately chosen. Mexico itself has tried to develop the isthmus economically multiple times over the last century, with limited success. The terrain is difficult, the region is poor. Infrastructure investment never quite materialized. But in 2019, under President Andrés Manuel López Obrador, known as AMLO Mexico, announced a serious, fully funded, government-backed plan to transform the isthmus into a modern transshipment corridor. The project has three main components. On the Pacific side of the corridor sits the port of Salina Cruz, in the state of Oaxaca. Salina Cruz has existed as a port for decades, but it was significantly underdeveloped, a small facility with limited capacity, inadequate crane infrastructure, and shallow berths that couldn't handle modern megaships. The corridor plan involves a major modernization, dredging to allow larger vessels, new container terminals, expanded storage capacity, and direct rail connections. The investment target for port upgrades on both sides runs into the billions of dollars. On the Gulf side, the Atlantic-facing side, sits the port of Coatzacoalcos in the state of Veracruz. Coatzacoalcos is already a more established industrial port, historically tied to Mexico's petrochemical industry. The plan expands its container handling capacity significantly and connects it directly to the new freight rail line. The idea is straightforward. A ship arrives from Asia at Salina Cruz on the Pacific. Its containers are offloaded, moved onto trains, carried 300 kilometers across the isthmus, and reloaded onto ships at Coatzacoalcos, heading to the US East Coast or Europe. The spine of the entire corridor is a modernized freight railway running across the isthmus between the two ports. The rail route across the isthmus has existed for more than a century, but it was single-track, slow, and unable to handle modern freight volumes. The current project upgrades it into a double-tracked, high-capacity freight corridor built for heavy container traffic. The targeted transit time from the Pacific port of Salina Cruz to the Gulf port of Coatzacoalcos is about 8 to 10 hours by rail. By comparison, a vessel using the Panama Canal must factor in ocean approach time, the lock transit, and during congestion days of queue. In the right conditions, especially during elevated canal wait times, the Isthmus corridor becomes a genuinely competitive alternative for certain Asia, US, East Coast, or transatlantic cargo flows. Alongside the ports and the railway, Mexico is developing a series of Polos de Desarrollo development zones at key points along the corridor. These are purpose-built industrial parks designed to attract manufacturing, processing, and assembly operations. The Mexican government has announced 10 such zones, with incentives including tax benefits, fast-tracked permitting, and infrastructure support. The target industries span automotive components, electronics, textiles, pharmaceuticals, and agribusiness, essentially the full spectrum of manufacturing that has historically been centered in Asia. The strategic logic here is clear. If you can attract factories to the isthmus, the corridor becomes more than a transit route. It becomes a manufacturing hub with direct rail access to two oceans. Goods don't just pass through, they're made there. Mexico has committed approximately $11 billion to the corridor project so far, including a $2 billion injection added by President Sheinbaum in 2025, with the full build-out, including all industrial zones at scale, projected to exceed $20 billion over time. Comparisons help put this in context. The Panama Canal expansion, completed in 2016, cost approximately $5.25 billion. The Suez Canal expansion, completed in 2015, cost around $8.5 billion. Mexico's corridor investment is in the same general range as these landmark infrastructure projects, though the corridor is a fundamentally different type of infrastructure. Construction has been ongoing since 2019, with the freight rail line reaching full operational status in 2024. Ports are currently running at roughly 60 to 70% of their target capacity, with Phase 2 expansion at Salina Cruz delayed until 2027. The first commercial cargo runs launched in early 2026, including a reported Maersk pilot transit in January 2026, processing around 10,000 TEUs per month in initial trials. The Interoceanic corridor has been in development since 2019, but 2023 and 2024 created a perfect storm of circumstances. Three forces are converging simultaneously, and together, they're reshaping North American trade in real time. The trade relationship between the United States and China has been under serious stress since 2018. Tariffs, technology restrictions, and deepening strategic competition have pushed American companies to reconsider their dependence on Chinese manufacturing. Companies across electronics, automotive, pharmaceutical, and consumer goods sectors have been actively moving production out of China, a process that accelerated significantly between 2022 and 2025. The question is, where does that production go? Some of it goes to Southeast Asia, Vietnam, India, Indonesia, but a significant and growing portion is heading to Mexico. Mexico has something Southeast Asia can't offer: physical proximity to the United States. A factory in Monterrey or Guadalajara can truck goods directly to US distribution centers faster and cheaper than anything coming off a ship from the other side of the Pacific. In 2023, Mexico surpassed China to become the United States' single largest goods trading partner and sustained that lead through 2025, with Mexico logging over $800 billion in cumulative goods trade with the US. That's a historic shift. Foreign direct investment into Mexico has reached record highs. Gulf Coast ports like Veracruz are handling rising container volumes, and industrial vacancy rates in key manufacturing corridors have fallen to historic lows as companies race for space. Major global players are moving in. Tesla is building in Nuevo León. Chinese automakers and electronics firms are establishing Mexican operations to access the US market under favorable trade rules. North America's supply chain map is actively shifting. Within that shift, the Interoceánico Corredor adds a new layer of strategic logic. An electronics manufacturer operating in one of the Isthmus industrial zones gains direct rail access to the Pacific for Asian components and direct rail access to the Gulf for exports to the US, East Coast or Europe. That dual ocean connectivity is a powerful draw for serious industrial investment. The 2023 drought in Panama. Climate scientists studying the region consistently project that the rainfall patterns supporting Gatun Lake will become less reliable over coming decades, not more. The canal's water management challenge is structural. Panama is actively exploring solutions, including a possible new reservoir to supplement Gatun Lake, but any significant new water infrastructure would take many years to plan, approve, fund, and build. In the meantime, shipping companies are planning for recurring disruption. The playbook is already being written. When Panama restricts transits, which route do we use? How do we reroute to avoid a 21-day wait? The Interoceánico Corridor doesn't have a water problem. It uses rail, which doesn't depend on rainfall or lake levels. As an overflow route, a release valve when Panama is congested, it offers something genuinely valuable: reliability, independent of weather. The United States-Mexico-Canada agreement creates significant tariff advantages for goods manufactured in North America. A product assembled in Mexico from components imported from Asia can potentially qualify for preferential trade terms into the US market, depending on its rules of origin compliance. This creates a strong incentive for manufacturers to add value in Mexico, not just ship cargo through it. The industrial zones along the corridor are designed to capture exactly that incentive. The Interoceánico Corridor cannot replace the Panama Canal. That framing misunderstands what both systems do. The Panama Canal moves actual ships, fully loaded vessels crossing between oceans without unloading. It handles enormous throughput across a huge range of cargo types: liquid bulk, dry bulk, vehicle carriers, container ships. It is a complete ocean-to-ocean transit system. The Interoceánico Corridor is a land bridge. It requires transshipment, unloading containers at one port, moving them by rail, reloading them at the other. That adds time and cost that a direct canal transit doesn't incur. For bulk cargo oil, grain, raw materials, the canal is almost certainly always going to be more efficient. You can't easily put crude oil on a train across Mexico and reload it onto a tanker. The economics don't work. But for containerized cargo, the boxes that carry most of what the modern economy actually consumes, the corridor becomes genuinely competitive under specific conditions. A container ship sailing from Shanghai to the US East Coast traditionally uses the Panama Canal. Total transit runs about 20 to 25 days. Canal tolls for a large Neo-Panamax vessel now range between $500,000 and $1 million per crossing in peak periods. Sailing around Africa avoids the canal but adds roughly 10,000 kilometers and 2 to 3 extra weeks at sea. During the 2023 drought, some carriers chose that route because Panama queues erased the time advantage. Mexico's corridor creates a third option. unload at Salina Cruz, rail across the Isthmus in 8–10 hours, reload at Coatzacoalcos. With port handling, the land crossing takes about 36 to 48 hours. The real variable is cost. Transshipment adds handling fees, scheduling risk, and complexity. For the corridor to compete, those costs plus shorter sailing time must beat canal tolls combined with congestion delays. In stable conditions, Panama remains simpler and cheaper for most cargo. The question is how often conditions stay stable. The Panama Canal moves roughly 300 to 400 million tons of cargo per year. The Interoceanic Corridor processed approximately 300,000 TEUs in 2025 during its initial operational phase, with projections targeting 700,000 TEUs in 2026 and scaling to 1.2 million TEUs by 2028 as port capacity expands. For context, the Port of Los Angeles alone handles more than 9 million TEUs per year. The Panama Canal handles the equivalent of roughly 5 to 6 million TEUs annually in containerized cargo. Even at full build-out, the corridor will not match Panama Canal volumes. It is designed to handle a commercially meaningful share of trade, enough to matter, but not enough to replace the canal outright. The better analogy is not a rival highway overtaking the main route. It is a parallel artery that absorbs pressure when congestion builds. In logistics terms, that distinction matters. Replacement changes dominance. Redundancy changes resilience. It's also worth being honest about what could go wrong. The Isthmus region has significant socioeconomic challenges. It is home to indigenous communities with complex and sometimes contested relationships with large infrastructure projects. Community opposition to elements of the corridor has been documented, and in Mexico's political and legal environment, community consent matters. Security is a concern. Parts of the Isthmus and its surrounding states have historically faced challenges with organized crime. A logistics corridor is only as reliable as its security environment. Operational complexity is real. Getting port operators, railway logistics companies, and shipping lines to build the commercial relationships and booking systems that make a corridor actually function, as opposed to simply physically existing, takes years of commercial development. And there's political continuity risk. Major projects of this scale span multiple presidential terms. Mexico's government changed in 2024 with the election of President Claudia Sheinbaum. That risk has now been addressed. Sheinbaum explicitly designated the corridor as a national priority in January 2026, with a $1.5 billion budget allocation and stated focus on accelerating the industrial zones. The funding question is settled, the execution question is not. Step back from Mexico's corridor and Panama's drought, and the real shift becomes clear. In 2021, the Suez Canal was blocked for 6 days by the Ever Given. 6 days disrupted hundreds of billions in trade and exposed the fragility of a single-point system. In 2023 and 2024, Houthi attacks in the Red Sea forced major carriers to reroute around Africa, adding weeks and billions in cost. Suez became unusable for months. Then Panama faced a drought that throttled capacity. 3 choke points, 3 crises, 1 pattern. Insurance markets are repricing risk. Shipping firms are redesigning routes. Governments are funding alternatives. For many years, global trade optimized for efficiency above all else. Fewer routes, bigger ships, maximum throughput. That model delivered enormous gains, but efficiency and resilience are not the same. A perfectly optimized system without redundancy becomes a scaled vulnerability. Climate volatility is increasing. Geopolitical friction is deepening. Trade relationships are shifting. Maritime routes, once seen as permanent, are proving conditional. Mexico's corridor is not the solution to every vulnerability. It is one emerging piece of a structural realignment. The more important signal lies in the logic behind it. The dominant question may be shifting from, what is the most efficient route, to, what is the most efficient route you can rely on? Whether Mexico can deliver that reliability operationally, commercially, and politically remains uncertain. If you think Mexico's corridor is the only challenge to Panama, you need to see what China is building next. Because there's another trade route in motion, one designed to bypass choke points entirely. Watch next. China's new trade route will destroy the Panama Canal.